Hey guys, tonight we spiral directly into one of the most catastrophically dumb wars in human history, a battle that escalated over a wooden bucket. Not a golden one, not an enchanted one, just a basic, splintery oak bucket someone yanked out of a public well like they were stealing somebody's emotional support dog. You are now a medieval Italian citizen, which means your daily life is 20% prayer, 40% plague avoidance, and 40% violently defending your city's honor over basically anything. And yes, in 1325, honor was apparently made of wood and used for drawing water. Picture this, you wake up in Bologna one morning to the sounds of church bells, angry merchants, and someone screaming about a stolen bucket. At first, you think it's a joke, maybe some peasants pulled a prank, but then you hear the word Modena. That's all it takes. People around you start flipping carts, blacksmiths sharpen pitchforks, and the mayor's foaming at the mouth like someone insulted his grandma's ravioli. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere random like Malaysia or Cleveland at 2:43 a.m., drop your location and local time in the comments below. I love seeing the sleep-deprived chaos worldwide. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a young man in Bologna, but young means you're about 16 and already halfway to being a hardened soldier. You've got one good tunic, a set of deeply questionable teeth, and a fierce love for your city that you absolutely did not choose. That's just how medieval Italy works. Your loyalty is assigned at birth, like your haircut and your inevitable tetanus. Modena and Bologna are two rival cities in northern Italy that have been in a centuries-long slap fight. They're like if two frat houses got hold of catapults and papal permission to murder each other. And now they've found a reason to go full carnage over a stupid bucket. Here's what historians mostly agree on. In 1325, a few soldiers from Modena snuck into Bologna and stole a wooden bucket from a city well. That's it. That's the inciting incident. They didn't assassinate a duke, burn a monastery, or poison anyone's lasagna. They just grabbed a well bucket and rode off into the night like medieval raccoons. Now you're hearing that the Modenese not only took the bucket, but are proudly displaying it like it's the crown jewels. You know what that means? War, duh. In this era, declaring war doesn't involve press conferences or United Nations meetings. It involves bell ringing, torch lighting, and one guy named Paolo riding through town yelling, "To arms!" while half the city drops their soup bowls and grabs pitchforks. You're conscripted by noon. You were supposed to harvest turnips today, but instead you're handed a rusty pike, a boiled leather vest, and told you're defending Bologna's honor by murdering strangers who prefer their pasta al dente. Meanwhile, in Modena, they are loving this. They've built a literal shrine for the bucket. It sits in the town hall like it's a sacred relic. Children are told bedtime stories about the night the brave Modenese struck a blow against the tyranny of Bologna via bucket theft. One guy even composed a song about it, and it slaps. It's mostly lute-based, but still. And here's the kicker. This is all technically part of a larger political dumpster fire called the Guelphs versus Ghibellines conflict. These were two massive medieval factions, one loyal to the Pope, the other to the Holy Roman Emperor. It's like a centuries-long turf war with incense and Latin chanting. Modena il Ghibellines, Bologna il Guelphs. You, all's a poor bastard caught in a religious political spiral you don't understand. So, while the bucket is the final straw, the rage was already simmering like a pot of questionable stew. Now it's boiling. You get one night to say goodbye to your family. Your mom cries. Your dad slaps your shoulder with the "don't die unless it's heroic" look. Your younger brother steals your sandals as a parting gift. Classic. By dawn, you and hundreds of other sweaty, underfed men are marching out of Bologna's gates in mismatched armor. Some guys have helmets made from cooking pots. One guy taped knives to his donkey. Nobody has a plan, but everyone has rage. Here's a verified historical fact. The War of the Bucket culminated in the Battle of Zappolino, one of the largest military engagements between Italian city-states during that century. And here's your weird nugget: the bucket itself was never recovered by Bologna. That thing stayed in Modena like a cursed souvenir, and it's still there on display in a civic museum. Yes, really. As you trudge toward Modena, someone near you mutters, "Do we even want the bucket back?" Another guy, maybe the city baker, whispers, "It's not about the bucket, it's about the message." You nod solemnly, pretending you know what that means. Historians still argue whether the bucket story was exaggerated later for comic effect, or if it genuinely was the spark that lit this Italian dumpster blaze. Maybe it was symbolic. Maybe someone just really hated Modena's public plumbing. But you don't care. You've got a pike in one hand, a moldy heel of bread in the other, and by next week, you'll either be a local legend or a footnote in a very dumb war. You wake up on a bed of damp hay next to a goat that isn't yours and a soldier who's snoring like a church organ collapsing. You were supposed to be marching toward glory, but now your feet smell like death, and someone stole your left boot while you slept. Welcome to medieval warfare. Outside the tent, which is really just two cloaks tied to a stick, the Bologna camp is stirring. Horses scream, men groan, someone's on fire, but it turns out he's just overcooking a turnip. Your army, and we use that term loosely. Looks like a collection of angry villagers cosplaying as knights. This isn't an organized campaign. This is two cities frothing at the mouth and hurling insults over mud puddles. The only strategy anyone's discussed so far is don't die stupidly. Too late for that. But let's rewind a second, because if you're going to be forced to care about this feud, you need to understand why Bologna and Modena hate each other like it's a family curse. Italy in the 14th century is not a unified country. It's a glittering mess of city-states, each thinking it's the main character. And just to spice things up, they've all picked sides in the holy war that wasn't the Guelphs versus the Ghibellines. Here's your basic cheat sheet. Guelphs will support the Pope. Ghibellines will support the Holy Roman Emperor. Everyone else was deeply confused and very stabby about it. You unfortunate soul are a Guelph, not because you chose it. You were born in Bologna, and Bologna is proudly pro-Pope. You grew up believing the emperor was some mustached villain who drowns kittens and taxes wine. And in Modena, the kids grow up thinking the Pope is a corrupt wizard with a crown fetish and weak sword stats. And like all great civil disputes, this one is less about politics and more about generations of pure, boiling spite. Bologna has long claimed it's the cultural and intellectual jewel of the region. We have Europe's oldest university, they shout between pissing contests. Modena, yeah, but we have rice and knives, come fight us. You might think this would have blown over after a couple of chess matches and passive-aggressive sermons. Nope, this is Italy. Every disagreement ends in theatrical violence and someone naming their cow after an enemy's mother. You overhear a captain explain the deeper feud like this. It's about power, control of the Via Emilia. You nod, pretending you know what that is. Spoiler, it's the Roman road that cuts through northern Italy. Trade, taxes, influence. It's kind of a big deal. And here's a historical fact for your blood-soaked trivia brain. The Via Emilia was a strategic artery of medieval Italy. Whoever controlled its trade routes could basically control the region's economy. So yeah, the bucket was the dumb match. But the pile of dry hay waiting to go up in flames, that's been years in the stacking. Your current commanding officer is a local baron's nephew who insists on wearing silk gloves in battle for morale. He once tried to read Sun Tzu and gave up after 2 pages, then declared war on a shrubbery for being too suspicious. Modena's army, meanwhile, is equally ridiculous. They've conscripted anyone with 2 arms and a vendetta. Their cavalry includes 3 actual knights, a disgraced bishop, and an old woman named Concetta, who once beat a bear with a skillet and now rides a donkey into battle screaming, "Per the bucket!" You catch sight of her during a border skirmish. She swings a broom like a mace, shouting, "That bucket had character," and leaves 3 Bolognese soldiers weeping in confusion. There's no dignity in this war. You watch a group of Modenese fling spoiled cheese into your camp with a catapult. One lands next to you, still mostly edible. You eat it. That's not a metaphor. That's just dinner. Meanwhile, Bologna's leaders are furious that Modena hasn't returned the bucket. It's a sacred vessel, one noble declares. It symbolizes our city's honor, which is odd because 2 months ago, that same noble used it to wash his socks. But now it's war treasure. Propaganda spreads like wildfire. Town criers scream about Modenese heretics and bucket defilers. Children are taught to hiss whenever someone says Modena. You don't even drink water anymore unless it's drawn from a loyalist-approved well. And here's your trivia tidbit. At least one 14th century chronicle claimed the Modenese built a fake holy relic shrine around the bucket just to troll Bologna. That's right, actual church architecture, built purely out of spite. If that isn't Italian warfare, what is? Meanwhile, your daily routine is wake up itchy, march 3rd miles, yell insults at a hill, eat something vaguely turnip-like, get ambushed by a guy wielding a table leg. You also discover that medieval armies don't really camp as much as exist in loosely organized chaos. There's a blacksmith who sells knives made from spoons, a priest who insists on blessing everyone's socks, and a guy named Enzo who claims he saw an angel riding a pig. Historians still argue whether the battle is even the right term for what's about to happen. Some say it was a formal engagement. Others say it was a glorified tavern brawl with better costumes.
You don't know. All you know is that Bologna's army is moving fast. Word is spreading. Modena refuses to give the bucket back. And now you're about to fight in a field named Zappolino, which sounds less like a battlefield and more like a wine-soaked clown.
Your captain rides by yelling, "This is for glory!" A nearby soldier mutters, "This is for wood!" And you tighten your one remaining boot, hold your rusty pike, and whisper to the sky, "If I die for a bucket, I'm haunting everyone." You arrive at Zappolino on a chilly, miserable morning that smells like wet sheep and impending disappointment. The dew on the grass glistens, as if nature is politely mocking you for getting into a life or death struggle over what is, once again, a bucket. You stare across the field and spot the Modenese army lining up on the opposite hill. They don't look particularly intimidating, but then again, neither do you. Some of them are on horseback, some are barefoot. One guy is shirtless and wearing what appears to be a curtain, but they're confident, and that's unnerving. A confident idiot with a sword is the most dangerous type. You brave defender of Bologna are now sandwiched in a wedge formation behind a guy who smells like goat cheese and fear, and in front of someone who keeps loudly insisting that he's a pacifist but was forced into this by astrology. Zappolino isn't even a real town. It's more of a bump in the terrain with some shrubs and maybe a cursed well. The terrain offers no advantages, no beauty, and no tactical significance unless you count the mud pits as defensive trenches. You don't. You just sink into them repeatedly. Let's be historically accurate for a moment. The Battle of Zappolino took place on November 15, 1325. It is considered by some chroniclers to be one of the largest confrontations in the ongoing Guelph-Ghibelline conflict, though calling it strategic would be like calling a food fight diplomatic. Your general tries to give a rousing speech. He climbs onto a tree stump, adjusts his very unnecessary feathered hat, and shouts, "We fight for Bologna, for God, for Thud." He's hit in the face by a flying turnip. The army cheers, not because they don't support him, but because it was a very satisfying sound. The plan, such as it is, seems to involve charging downhill at full speed. Despite the mud, poor visibility, and the fact that half your army has never actually practiced charging anything except maybe a debt collector, when the horn blows, run! Someone yells, to where you shout back, "Forward, why glory?" or "Death." Yes, cool. The horn blows. You run. Well, you try to run. First, you slip, then you fall. Then the guy behind you trips over your body, and now you're both tangled in a mess of limbs and swearing. By the time you regain your footing, half the army has already collided with the Modenese like a meat avalanche. And it's chaos. The two armies slam together like two drunks fighting over a meatball sub at 2 a.m. There's no elegance, no technique, just lots of yelling, clanging, and people swinging weapons they don't quite know how to use. You see a man fight with a bench leg. You see another man defend himself with a chicken coop lid. One knight attempts to mount his horse mid-battle, fails spectacularly, and ends up jousting a tree. And somewhere, amid the brawl, Concetta reappears, Modena's own one-woman apocalypse. She's got a mop in one hand, a butcher knife in the other, and she's singing what sounds like a drinking song about her ex-husband. You make a mental note, don't fight her. Here's your bizarre trivia for this section. One Modenese fighter reportedly painted a bucket on his shield and ran into battle screaming, "Mine!" It's unclear whether this was a tactical decision or just the medieval version of a meme. The fighting lasts less than a day. Some say hours, some say minutes. Most of it is spent slipping in the mud, getting lost in smoke, or accidentally stabbing a teammate because their helmet looks vaguely Modenese. And here's the kicker. Despite Bologna having more troops on paper, up to 30,000 including militias, their forces were poorly organized, and many simply fled once the chaos started. Modena, by contrast, fought like they meant it, which is either impressive or deeply disturbing, depending on your perspective. One Modenese soldier corners you. He's got a crooked sword and the wild eyes of someone who'd kill over the last piece of garlic bread. "You think we care about your university?" he growls. "I can't read." You answer, "Neither can I," he whispers, and runs away crying. War is weird. Historians still debate what the actual casualty count was. Some say it was modest. Others suggest thousands. Most agree it was a whole lot of dung for a very small hill. What they all agree on, Modena won. Decisively. Bologna's army collapses like a house of wet scrolls. The retreat is unorganized and humiliating. Some soldiers ditch their weapons. One man tries to disguise himself as a bush. Another trades his helmet for a ride home in a donkey cart. You, somehow, survive. You limp away from the field with a dislocated shoulder, one boot still, and a newfound hatred for large wooden containers. You pass your general, who is face down in a puddle, yelling. This was all a metaphor. You stop, turn around, look back, and there it is, the bucket, perched proudly on a Modenese wagon, surrounded by cheering soldiers. You swear it glows with smugness. You briefly consider stealing it back, but then remember how today went. You keep walking. You don't sleep that night, partly because your ribs feel like they've been gently rearranged by a gorilla, and partly because your entire army is trying to cram itself through Bologna's east gate at once like sheep in a fire drill. The guards give up checking for deserters around midnight. At this point, if you've got at least one tooth and no visible plague boils, they wave you through. Inside the city, the atmosphere is tense. Not just because your army lost. You've lost before. It's how you lost. Badly, embarrassingly, historically, stupidly, and worst of all, publicly. By dawn, every peasant, merchant, and pigeon in northern Italy knows that Modena beat Bologna over a wooden bucket. The shame settles over the city like smoke. The streets are silent. Church bells don't ring. Priests whisper masses as if God might be too embarrassed to listen. And then, of course, the Guelphs and Ghibellines start screaming at each other again. You've heard of political debates. This is not that. This is more like a tavern brawl with vocabulary. Here's what makes it even worse. No one in Italy agrees on who's in charge of anything. It's not just cities versus cities. Inside the cities, factions fight over factions. And inside those factions, families hate each other more than they hate outsiders. You've got the Guelphs, who support the Pope, except some of them prefer a different Pope, or an earlier Pope, or a Pope who hasn't even been elected yet but sounds promising. Then you've got the Ghibellines, who support the Holy Roman Emperor, unless he raises taxes, insults someone's cousin, or sneezes near Tuscany. You try to explain this to a friend using bread metaphors. Imagine if supporting rye meant you had to stab everyone who likes sourdough. He nods. So we kill the focaccia people first. Exactly. Back in Modena. Meanwhile, the mood is the exact opposite. The bucket is now legend. They parade it through the streets. Children throw flowers at it. One guy bows before it like it's the Ark of the Covenant. They build a new pedestal for it, carved with dramatic Latin inscriptions like Aquae Victoria, the waters of victory. You can't make this up. Or rather, they couldn't. They actually built a room for the bucket inside Modena's City Hall. It's still there, to this day, in a small museum. This is your verified historical fact. And your trivia of the night, at least one 14th century Modenese poem about the war includes a passage where the bucket speaks. Like, literally, it delivers a monologue about its escape from Bologna and the glory of serving Modena. No one questioned this. Back in Bologna, city officials are scrambling to contain the humiliation. They don't want to talk about the loss. Instead, they commission a massive church renovation to restore moral balance, they say. Translation: to distract everyone from the fact that the Pope's favorite city just got pantsed by its rowdy little neighbor. Some nobles suggest retaliation. Others want to sue. Sue in 1325 means beg the Pope to excommunicate someone until they cry. Meanwhile, half the army just wants lunch. You overhear an argument in the marketplace. Modena insulted the church by not returning the bucket. It's just a bucket. It was blessed water by who? Marco, by you. You threw up in it during the festival. It was still blessed. The most heated debates happen in Bologna's university, Europe's oldest, and currently the loudest. Professors are practically foaming at the mouth. Was it truly about the bucket? Or was the bucket a metaphor for sovereignty? Do symbols matter more than soldiers? Can we weaponize public shame as a deterrent against future wooden theft? One philosopher says, it is not about the bucket, it is about the emptiness within the bucket. You're not sure if he's talking about the war or his marriage. Historians still argue whether the bucket was a trigger, a pretext, or just a convenient scapegoat for a war that was always going to happen. The truth, probably all three, plus ego, so much ego. There's a story going around that the mayor of Bologna is now demanding a replacement bucket be carved from marble. It shall last forever, he reportedly says, unlike our dignity. And what about you? You're nursing wounds that smell like old cheese and shame, but something strange is happening. You feel relief, because amid all this chaos, you survived. You didn't die over a bucket. You get to tell people for years. Yeah, I was there. Zappolino, mud up to the knees. Concetta almost bit my ear off. They'll nod solemnly. They'll offer wine, and you'll lean in and whisper, that bucket wasn't even that nice. You've barely finished healing when the city of Bologna decides it's time to rebuild the army. Not because anyone's threatening them right now, but because pride is a disease and your city has terminal symptoms. You're back on training duty. You'd hope for a desk job. Instead, you're helping armed peasants with whatever's sharp and won't give you tetanus immediately. One guy shows up with a fireplace poker. Another brings a rake. The guy with the rake is promoted. This phase of the war, it's not really war anymore. It's grudge maintenance. Bologna isn't just mad they're festering. The bucket might be gone, but its spiritual presence looms large. It appears in sermons. It haunts art. Someone even commissions a dramatic tapestry titled The Noble Vessel Carried Off by Heathens. You pose for it. By the way, you're screaming soldier number 3. You don't get paid. The city organizes militia training. You're herded into the town square with 50 other poor souls to be drilled. The captain in charge is blind in one eye and seems to think he's still fighting the Crusades. His instructions include, always stab upward. Never trust a Ghibelline with a big nose. Yell glory before you die. One man faints from boredom. Another throws a rock at a pigeon and is immediately accused of witchcraft. The drill continues. Here's your historical fact. During the early 14th century, city militias in Italy were often made up of civilian volunteers, including artisans, bakers, and even university students. This means that yes, your city's line of defense includes a guy who makes candles for a living and a philosophy major who thinks swords are patriarchal constructs. Meanwhile, Modena is getting bolder. They start raiding nearby territories, not full-on invasions, more like petty robberies with a patriotic twist. A Modenese patrol robs a wine cart near the border and replaces the wine with a note that reads, "Thanks for the grapes." Traitors, Bologna's reaction, public weeping, and also declaring the wine tainted by sin. Even worse, Modena starts writing songs about the bucket. And they're catchy. You catch yourself humming one, then panic. You slap yourself. You say 5 Hail Marys and burn your own sandals just to be safe. Back home, the mayor has not taken the loss well. He walks around muttering to himself. Flanked by guards with extremely large hats, he's ordered every remaining bucket in the city to be engraved with the city crest, so no one confuses us with barbarians again. Your friend Franco opens a bucket shop. It's called True Bologna Originals. He sells one to a noble who bursts into tears while holding it. The church gets involved too. A friar preaches, "Blessed are those who thirst, for they shall not steal Modenese property." The crowd applauds. Someone throws a shoe. That's just how sermons go now. Here's your trivia treat. A legend began circulating that the original bucket had once been used to draw holy water during a festival celebrating St. Petronius, Bologna's patron saint. There's no proof, but never let facts get in the way of a righteous rage spiral. One night, you sit at a tavern with some fellow survivors. You're all nursing bruises, debts, and cups of very bad ale. Someone proposes a toast. "To the bucket," he says solemnly. Everyone groans. "May it rot." You all drink. Then someone slams their mug down. "Let's get it back." Silence. You stare at him. His name is Lorenzo. He's got too many teeth and the energy of a man who once punched a painting for looking smug. "You want to steal the bucket back?" He grins. "It's just sitting there, in a room, with guards who probably nap a lot." You say nothing, but you think, maybe. And this is the problem with petty wars. They breed petty ideas. Historians still debate whether any revenge raids ever attempted to retrieve the bucket. Some chronicles hint at covert attempts. Others say Bologna never dared again. But a diary found in the 1600s mentions a plot, hatched in wine and whispered in shame, to recover the lost vessel. You're pretty sure that was you, or someone very dumb, very drunk, and very determined to rewrite history with a bucket heist. The problem is, by this point, Modena has fortified the bucket room. There are guards, there's a gate, there's even a moat. You're not sure what kind of loot warrants a moat, but apparently this does. You ask your cousin, who's a carpenter, how to sneak past a moat. He stares at you, "Don't." "But what if we dress like monks?" I said, "Don't." You drop it, sort of. But deep down, the dream lingers. Not glory, not revenge, just the sweet, stupid satisfaction of walking out of Modena with the world's most overhyped container under your arm. That, and maybe sticking a fish in their mayor's mailbox. You're now officially a veteran of the War of the Bucket, which sounds impressive until you realize you've mostly been used for manual labor and posing dramatically in front of grieving nobles. Still, you get to wear a slightly shinier belt now, and in medieval Italy, belts are social currency. One notch tighter and you're basically nobility. Your current assignment: guard the city's water supply. Yes, after losing one bucket, Bologna is in full paranoid overdrive. Every well, barrel, and questionable puddle is now considered strategic infrastructure. You and 3 other guards are stationed next to a community fountain that smells like regret and old radishes. Every time someone approaches with a bucket, you have to inspect it. You have to check the base. You have to look for the Modenese city crest. One guy brings a copper pot and you nearly arrest him. This is your life now, bucket checkpoint Charlie. Dun, 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 dun. Meanwhile, Modena has doubled down. That bucket, it's practically royalty now. They've given it a name, Secchia Sacra, the sacred pail. There's a painting of it floating up to heaven on a beam of light. A local playwright pens a tragic opera about its abduction. In one scene, the bucket whispers, "Take me home," and the entire audience weeps.
You wish you were exaggerating.
Here's your historical fact of the night Modena did. In fact, build a special chamber for the captured Bolognese bucket, and it still exists today, displayed in the Torre della Ghirlandina. their iconic civic tower. It has been there for 700 years. The war ended, the Renaissance happened, Napoleon came and went, and that bucket never left. You start dreaming about it. Not metaphorically, literal dreams. You're running through endless hills, holding the bucket, chased by monks chanting, "Return what was never yours, one of them is your mother." You tell your priest he recommends fasting and prayer. You try that. You hallucinate a goat that looks like the mayor of Modena. That's when you stop fasting. Here's your weird trivia bit. A rumor spreads that the Modenese have secretly reinforced the bucket with iron bands and velvet lining, like it's the holy grail of plumbing. One soldier insists he saw it glow slightly under candlelight. Another says it made his cousin's arthritis disappear. You say they've all inhaled too much chimney smoke. But the obsession is real. Bologna's leaders hold a council to discuss symbolic rebalancing of moral authority. You sit in the back, trying to stay awake, while scholars argue whether building a larger bucket would psychologically restore Bologna's civic pride. They call it Project Aqua Dignitas. Proposals include a gold bucket suspended over the city square, a bucket-shaped fountain that plays Gregorian chants when touched, a bucket-themed church bell that rings only when Modena is mentioned in an angry tone. None are approved, not because they're bad ideas they are, but because the treasury is empty. War is expensive. So is repairing the mayor's house after he accidentally set fire to it while cursing Modena. So instead, Bologna settles for an oath. Every guard, soldier, and municipal official now swears annually, "I shall protect the waters of Bologna and never again let vessels fall into enemy hands." You're made to recite it during a ceremony where a priest blesses 10 buckets in a row and sprinkles you with rose water. It's weirdly moving until someone sneezes and drops a bucket and you have to restart from the top. Meanwhile, back in Modena, they host a bucket parade. Not kidding. The entire city turns out. Musicians play, children wear wooden helmets, the bucket is carried through the streets on a silk pillow. Accompanied by armed guards and one overly enthusiastic juggler, they chant, "Sequia, Sequia, Modena Victor." You hear about it through a passing merchant. You don't cry, but you definitely knock over a chair and blame it on the wind. Here's where things get philosophical. A wandering friar visits Bologna. He's old, wise, and slightly senile. He delivers a sermon where he says perhaps the bucket was a mirror. It reflected only what we wanted it to. You don't know what that means, but you nod anyway because everyone else is doing it. Historians later note that the bucket gradually shifted from a literal object to a symbol of defiance, identity, and absurdity. Some scholars say Modena embraced it to mock Bologna. Others claim it became a sincere emblem of unity. You say it became a medieval meme. Your old captain returns from a diplomatic mission to Rome. He's brought news. The Pope refuses to get involved. His official message: buckets are beneath the concern of the Holy See. You are now officially on your own. No divine intervention, no imperial army, just two cities stewing in century-old resentment, with a wooden trophy at the center. And you, standing at a public well with a spear and a deepening sense that nothing will ever be normal again. It's early morning and you're sitting at your post, guarding yet another public well like it's a dragon's hoard. You've stopped pretending this is about civic duty. It's about making sure no drunk student mistakes this bucket for a Modenese spy. That happened once. The student head-butted the bucket and passed out. The bucket won. Word arrives, the bucket is going on tour. Yes, Modena has decided the sacred pail deserves to visit the countryside. A traveling showcase, complete with banners, guards, and theatrical reenactments of the infamous heist. Children reenact the heroic theft with wooden swords. One performance ends with a puppet version of you crying in the mud. You weren't consulted. There's a flyer now. Come witness the hero of Zappolino, the bucket that broke Bologna. And it's working. Villages cheer, merchants sell souvenirs, miniature buckets, bucket wine mugs, bucket-shaped cheese wheels. One entrepreneur in Parma launches a perfume called Essenza di Secchia, which smells like wet pine and bitter tears. Here's your historical fact, while the traveling bucket showcase is likely a later legend. Modena's obsession with the bucket became part of regional identity, even appearing in political satire and art for centuries. They didn't just win a war, they won the narrative. Back in Bologna, morale is frayed. Some citizens want to move on, others want to retaliate. A few suggest building a bigger bucket and pretending it was the original all along. You attend a secret midnight meeting in a cellar beneath a bakery. 12 men, 1 candle, lots of angry bread. This isn't about buckets anymore, says the man at the head of the table, who may or may not be drunk. It's about truth. Another man slams the table. That bucket belonged to my great-grandfather. How old are you, you ask? 24, he says quietly. The meeting spirals. One person wants to hire Swiss mercenaries. Another wants to dig a tunnel into Modena. One man thinks they should summon a demon. You leave halfway through when someone pulls out a map of Italy that's just a piece of cheese with names carved into it. Back on the streets, things aren't much better. A Modenese traveler is caught passing through town. He claims he's just a melon vendor. You find a small carved bucket charm in his bag. The mayor personally sentences him to 12 days of symbolic exile, which means being locked in a shed with a cow that kicks. Rumors spread. The bucket is actually cursed. The bucket was replaced with a fake. The real bucket is still buried somewhere near Zappolino, under a bucket-shaped rock. You find yourself strangely invested in these rumors. Which brings us to tonight's trivia moment. Some 17th century accounts, likely fictionalized, claim that the bucket was not the original, just a decoy Modena used to taunt Bologna while hiding the real one underground. Naturally, there's zero evidence, but this doesn't stop 5 amateur historians from spending 3 weeks digging up a vineyard and nearly causing a diplomatic incident with a wine guild. In the middle of all this, you're given a new assignment. Guard duty at the northern gate. Why? Because Bologna is expecting visitors. Not invaders, just a diplomatic delegation from Modena. That's right, they're sending envoys, not to return the bucket, just to talk. This is a trap. You think, or a joke, or both. You stand at the gate when they arrive, a small group of well-dressed officials, smug as boiled grapes. At the center is an elderly Modenese man wearing robes far too clean for someone whose city has been publicly worshipping a water container for 2 decades. You step forward. Name and purpose, you say? I am Giorgio della Scaglia, he says, smiling like someone who's just found a coin in their enemy's stew. We are here to discuss peace. You stare. Behind him, you notice one of his aides is carrying something wrapped in velvet, not the bucket. Surely, no, too small, too suspicious. You glance at your captain, who nods grimly. Escort them, gently. You escort them into the council chambers. The Modenese delegation is offered wine, but they insist on bringing their own. It's from a vineyard just south of Zappolino, they say, where the soil was soaked with Bolognese valor. You resist the urge to throw a spoon. During the meeting, they offer a formal proposal. Let us end hostilities. Let us unite in trade. Let the bucket remain with us as a symbol. Of course, not a trophy. Absolutely not, says your mayor, pounding the table. What if, Giorgio adds, we allow Bologna to send a plaque to hang beside it? The room erupts, someone faints, a monk throws his shoe. You quietly slip out of the room and return to your post. You've heard enough. You glance up at the sky and whisper, it's just a bucket. Why are we like this? A breeze stirs. It smells like Modenese wine and Bolognese disappointment. You've started timing your life by how many times someone mentions the bucket before lunch. Today's record 11, the fishmonger accused a cat of being a Modenese sympathizer for drinking from a bucket. The cat responded by vomiting on his sandals. Victory unclear. You're back on Northern Gate duty, which is somehow both boring and deeply traumatic. Every time a stranger walks up with a cart, you tense like they're going to pull out the sacred pail and say, looking for this. They never do, but they always could. The Modenese delegation has left Bologna after 3 days of diplomatic exchange, which mostly involved yelling, drinking, and passive-aggressive poetry. Their final offer, a small commemorative replica of the bucket, crafted from local olive wood as a gesture of healing. The mayor rejected it with the phrase, "We don't need your tree trash." Still, a few city officials took the replica. It now sits in the back of the archives next to a stack of dusty helmets and a half-eaten cannonball cake from last year's Saint Day. But something shifted. The war's been quiet for months. No skirmishes, no ambushes, just waiting, which, in medieval Italy, is the most dangerous phase of any conflict. It means people have time to plan. Whispers begin. Plans, schemes, retaliation, not full war, just symbolic embarrassment. And now you're part of one. Congratulations. You, 3 other veterans, and an utterly unreliable cartographer named Piero have been quietly pulled aside for a special mission. It's not official, no documents, no orders, just a vague statement from a councilman. We want Modena to know we haven't forgotten. Your assignment, infiltrate Modena, not to steal the bucket. No one's that insane anymore. Your job is to sneak into the city under the guise of pilgrims, reach the civic tower, and slightly vandalize it. Slightly? We're talking paint. The councilman insists. Or a rude carving, something tasteful, something that says, we remember, but we're above it. You agree immediately. Piero produces a map. It's completely inaccurate and appears to be drawn on the back of a child's homework. The river is labeled Wet Danger Snake. The Modenese Tower is a stick figure with a crown. Still, the plan is set. You travel at night. You avoid the main roads. You wear pilgrim robes that smell like fermented cabbage. One of your teammates insists on carrying a wooden staff carved with cryptic Latin. It probably says, "Blessed are the pranksters." You arrive at the outskirts of Modena just before dawn. The tower looms ahead. Tall, proud, smug. You wait until nightfall. Your team moves in silence. Well, except for Piero, who keeps humming. You threaten him with a rock. You scale the tower's outer wall using a grappling hook that may or may not be a modified hay fork. You slip twice. Once you land on a windowsill occupied by a sleeping pigeon, it wakes. You make eye contact. The pigeon doesn't scream. It judges. You reach the top. You open your pack. You pull out the carving tools. Your assigned task: inscribe a small phrase near the top ledge. Something subtle, visible only to the trained eye. You carve. Bologna, lives, bucket thieves. It's not elegant. It's not deep. But it's honest. You finish the job, you begin your descent, and that's when it happens. A guard! He appears from a side stairwell, munching on a plum and absolutely not expecting 4 weird monks clinging to his tower. You freeze! He stares, you wave. He screams. You run. Down the tower, across the courtyard, through an alley, over a chicken, under a laundry line, through a fountain. One of you gets slapped by a nun. You make it to the outer wall and leap off it into a pile of hay that smells suspiciously like goat pee. You sprint for the woods and don't stop until your lungs feel like they've been scrubbed with sand. The next morning, your legs are jelly and your hands are covered in blood and irony. You make it back to Bologna. No parade, no welcome, but a silent nod from the councilman. Mission successful. Here's your historical nugget. While there's no record of a Bolognese infiltration of Modena post-war, 16th century graffiti discovered on the Torre della Ghirlandina bore phrases referencing the bucket and Bologna's eternal memory. It's unclear if it was from the time of the war or later satire, but the bucket clearly never left the public imagination. And here's your trivia one. Modenese noble allegedly had his dog trained to bark whenever someone said Bologna, the dog's name Secchiotto, which means little bucket. Historians still debate whether these retaliations kept the peace or just prolonged the pettiness. But what's certain is this: neither side forgot, neither side forgave, and everyone kept talking about that damn bucket. You limp back to your well-guarding post the next day. You sit, you sigh. You murmur to yourself, we carved a poem into a tower. We may have started another war. The cat from earlier sits beside you, now wearing a stolen Bolognese soldier's cap. It meows. You nod. Everything is normal again. You return to duty, expecting at least a warm cup of something fermented. Instead, you're handed a broom and told to sweep the shame off the city square. Metaphorically, of course. But also literally, pigeons have been holding their own peace talks over your statue's head. Meanwhile, the inscription you carved into Modena's tower, it's caused a diplomatic avalanche. Modena's response is loud and theatrical. The mayor holds a public proclamation in the town square. He waves a copy of the inscription like it's a declaration of war carved by Satan himself. They broke into our sacred civic space, he says, dramatically pausing for effect, and insulted our most holy relic. The crowd gasps, someone faints, a child begins to cry, not from fear, but because someone stole his sausage roll. Modena doesn't retaliate with soldiers. No, they retaliate with poetry. Harsh, cutting, painfully rhymed poetry. The next market day, Bologna is flooded with pamphlets titled Elegy for the Idiots Who Carved My Tower. It includes such brutal zingers as, Bologna once had honor true, but now it hides behind a stew. And they carved at night. They thought it neat. But even pigeons know defeat. You read it, you cry, not from shame, just from how bad the rhymes are. Here's your historical fact. Poetry, satire, and theatrical performances were commonly used in medieval Italian city rivalries, sometimes replacing actual warfare as a means of civic expression. It wasn't just about swords, it was about who could humiliate whom the loudest and longest. And that's what this becomes, a public relations war. Modena paints murals of the bucket. Bologna starts hanging banners that say things like, buckets come and go, but Bologna bakes the bread. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds like an insult. A local sculptor in Bologna unveils his newest masterpiece, a marble statue of a Modenese soldier slipping on a banana peel while carrying a bucket. You're told it's symbolic. You just call it therapeutic. Then comes the latest escalation. Modena opens a bucket interpretation center. It's not a museum. It's a multi-sensory journey through bucket history. You hear about it from a traveling merchant who describes it like this. You walk in, you smell wood, there's music, there's fog. At one point, a voice whispers, what does it mean to carry water? Then a light shines on the bucket. People clap. You stare at him for 10 seconds before responding. You paid for that twice. Here's your trivia tonight. At least one Modenese noble commissioned an oil painting of himself bathing next to the bucket. It was reportedly titled Cleansed in Victory. You don't know whether to laugh or file a formal complaint with the universe. Back in Bologna, the city leaders are cracking. One council member suggests faking a second, bigger bucket and claiming that the Modenese one is a counterfeit. We say our bucket was the true relic, he says, eyes wild, and that they stole the decoy. Someone else proposes forming an alliance with Florence, of all cities, just to tip the balance. Florence doesn't even like us. Someone points out, they don't have to like us, they just have to hate Modena more. You're starting to believe that the only sane person in the city is a mute nun who occasionally throws breadcrumbs at your helmet and mutters, all buckets return to dust. You begin to see buckets everywhere. They appear in your dreams, in puddles, in bread loaves. You start noticing anyone who walks slightly too upright while carrying water. You begin to question everything. Was it ever really about the bucket? Or was the bucket just a container for something deeper, pride territory, a desperate cry for validation from two cities trapped in a feedback loop of pettiness and pasta? Historians still argue about it. Some say the War of the Bucket was just a symptom of broader regional tensions. Others say it was a metaphor. A few, usually the ones with long beards and empty wine bottles, say it was a prophecy fulfilled. You don't know, you just guard wells now. Sometimes children come up to you and ask, is it true Modena stole our water? You nod solemnly. They didn't just steal our water. You whisper, they stole our ability to pretend we're normal. The child nods, offers you a grape, you accept. Even if the war is paused, even if no swords are drawn, the bucket lives on. In the minds of two cities, in the art, the songs, the insults, and in your own hollow, echoing dreams where you chase it through hallways that never end. It's spring now, which means the plague is only mildly active and the pigeons have returned to their seasonal hobby of dive-bombing local officials. life in Bologna trudges on. The war isn't officially over, but it's also not officially anything. There's no treaty, no peace ceremony, just a mutually agreed upon silence so everyone can catch their breath, count their bread, and avoid another national embarrassment involving medieval crockery. But the propaganda, oh, it's booming. This week, you're handed a new job escort a group of friars to a sermon about bucket theft. Yes, it's an actual service, complete with hymns, candles, and a dramatic reading from something called the Gospel according to St. Paulo the Humiliated. It's not technically in the Bible, but hey, nothing's sacred anymore. The friar stands at the pulpit and bellows, "And the Lord said, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's container." You try not to laugh. You fail. You get elbowed by an old woman who has knitted "Remember Zappolino" into her shawl. This is what the war has become, a moral performance. You're no longer fighting with spears and swords. Now it's pamphlets, parables, and passive-aggressive murals. The church has weighed in carefully. They don't take sides, but they do bless both cities' water sources in an attempt to equalize the holiness. The Modenese call this a win. The Bolognese call it a grave misunderstanding of divine justice. Here's your historical fact. In the decades following the War of the Bucket, both Modena and Bologna commissioned religious artwork and liturgical music referencing their rivalry, some of which has survived in fragments. Nothing moves the faithful quite like ecclesiastical score settling. And here's your trivia for tonight. One church in Modena installed a baptismal font shaped like a bucket. The priest reportedly explained, "If the Lord can turn water to wine, he can surely turn shame to victory." You escort another propaganda team to the countryside. A group of performers funded by the city to act out educational morality plays about Bolognese virtue. One skit features a Modenese actor in a giant bucket costume who walks around kicking puppies and shouting, "I hate learning." You ask the playwright if this is historically accurate. He shrugs. It's emotionally accurate. Then comes the printing. Well, hand copying. Bologna's scribes are working overtime to produce the illustrated chronicle of the Bucket War. You're asked to pose again. This time, you're stoic sentinel number 4, witness to betrayal. You hold a mop like a halberd and scowl into the middle distance. You still don't get paid. The youth are eating it up. Students at the university now write essays on the symbolic weight of buckets in a fractured socio-political landscape. One popular theory claims the bucket represents liquid sovereignty. Another argues it was a vessel for divine imbalance. A third just writes, "Modena stinks." He gets an A. But here's the most surreal part. Bologna opens a rival museum. It's called the Center for Liquid Ethics. Inside is an empty pedestal with a plaque that reads, "Here once stood a bucket, until sin took it." The tour guide, who is clearly also your cousin Mario in a wig, gives elaborate, theatrical explanations. This empty space represents the absence of dignity. This rope barrier, the limits of forgiveness. This smell, authentic medieval sadness. You try to leave, Mario corners you and whispers, "Wait until you see the gift shop." The gift shop sells tiny marble pedestals labeled "Shame Not Included." I survived Zappolino tankards. Soap shaped like crying Bolognese citizens. Modena responds immediately by painting a massive mural on their city wall. It shows a victorious Modenese soldier carrying the bucket and the empty pedestal. He's giving it bunny ears. 2 days later, Bologna's mayor demands the mural be removed. Modena refuses. Bologna then commissions a counter-mural on a cow. It lasts one rainstorm. Historians still argue about this period. Some call it the cultural phase of the war. Others call it the dumb renaissance. You call it Wednesday. But deep down, everyone knows the truth. The war may not have ended in battle, but it never really ended. The bucket is still gone. The wound is still open, and the propaganda is now permanent. It's not about water or honor or even Modena. It's about the performance of victory and the refusal to lose even when you already have. You walk home from the museum, pass a statue, someone's added a wooden bucket to the head. You sigh, you adjust your helmet, and you keep walking. You've got a sermon at 7 and a poetry duel at 8. Just another day in post-bucket Bologna. You wake up to the sound of someone yelling. It's over, they surrendered, and you immediately assume the plague is back, or someone finally arrested that mime who's been impersonating the bucket for tips. But no, it's not war, it's not illness, it's a truce. Sort of. Apparently, Modena and Bologna have agreed to enter into peaceful relations. Not peace, not forgiveness, just relations. Like two exes texting each other K after a 2-year feud over a salad bowl. The document is read aloud in the town square by a man in a powdered wig, which feels premature considering no one invented wigs yet. He clears his throat. Henceforth, there shall be no more violence, theft, or symbolic acts of aquatic aggression. The crowd murmurs. One old man mutters, "What if they deserve aquatic aggression?" Another suggests launching a fish across the border just to see what happens. You stay quiet, because here's the thing, you don't trust it. You've been through too much. You've seen too many monks scream about buckets. You've eaten too many peace feasts that ended with someone flipping a table and yelling, "Zappolino lives!" Still, the city changes. Guards are reassigned from bucket watch to more ordinary duties, like watching merchants cheat tourists and preventing cows from entering the cathedral again. You're moved to a post by the city archives, dusty, quiet, and mostly safe, unless a historian gets too passionate. One day, a messenger arrives from Modena. He carries wait for it a gift. Not the bucket. Calm down. They're not that generous. It's a painting of the bucket, rendered in soft pastels, with a little inscription underneath. To our old rivals, with memory and mischief, it's shockingly tasteful, weirdly touching. Bologna's city council stares at it like it's a snake wearing a hat. Are they mocking us? Someone whispers. Probably, says the mayor, but I kind of like the brushwork. They hang it anyway, in the mayor's office, slightly tilted, just in case. Here's your historical fact. While no formal peace treaty ended the War of the Bucket, hostilities between Bologna and Modena gradually diminished in the following decades, replaced by trade, cultural exchange, and ironically shared festivals. Yes, you heard that right. Joint festivals. The first one is called La Festa dell'Acqua, the Water Festival, held at the border between both cities, a neutral field, controlled wine consumption, bucket references allowed, but only in approved songs. You're sent as part of Bologna's diplomatic security detail, which really just means don't let anyone punch a goat again. The festival is strange. There are games. One involves trying to balance a full bucket on your head while reciting poetry. Another is just bucket tossing, which ends with a man concussed and 2 women declaring war on gravity. You find yourself face to face with a Modenese guard, not in battle, just at the wine tent. He nods. You nod back. He says, "Still mad." You shrug. About the war or the parade float with our mayor crying in a diaper. He laughs. You laugh. It's deeply uncomfortable. You hear music. You see lights. There's a performance, a comedic play about the war. Actors in ridiculous armor flail about and cry. Not my bucket to great applause. You sit in the grass. You drink something fermented and questionable. And for the first time, you feel it. The war is fading. The bucket's still gone, but somehow you're okay. Here's your trivia of the night in the 19th century. Italian author Alessandro Tassoni wrote a satirical poem titled La Secchia Rapita, the Stolen Bucket. Turning the war into an epic parody of itself, it became wildly popular, ensuring that even centuries later, people remembered the dumbest reason a war was ever fought. Historians still argue about the lasting effects. Some say the war hardened the cities. Others say it bound them together in a uniquely Italian way through rivalry, comedy, and shared historical absurdity. But for you, standing in the fading sunlight with a wooden wine cup and a scar under your eye from a misplaced soup ladle, it means one thing. You can finally stop looking over your shoulder every time you see a bucket. Almost. You get back to Bologna after the festival. A child walks past with a toy wagon. In it, a wooden bucket. You flinch. Old habits die hard. Weeks pass. The city exhales. The war may not be officially over, but people are tired, not just physically, emotionally. There are only so many angry sermons, so many nationalistic bucket-themed pies that a society can endure before it collectively says, let's just pretend that didn't happen. You're reassigned again. This time, you're stationed in the archives. It's the city's way of saying, thank you for not dying horribly. Please go count dusty things. Your job, catalog the War of the Bucket documents, every letter, poem, battle report, and sketch made during the conflict. There are so many sketches. One soldier apparently chronicled the entire Battle of Zappolino using stick figures and passive-aggressive arrows. You hang it in your office. It's titled Moments Before the Slipping. But as you dig through the records, you start to see patterns. It wasn't just about the bucket. It never was. The tensions, political, religious, personal, they were all there. The bucket was just the most convenient excuse anyone could agree on, simple, portable, and excellent for shouting about. Here's your historical fact. The War of the Bucket is one of the most enduring examples of how small symbolic acts like sealing a public well bucket can escalate in the context of broader unresolved conflict. Scholars now use it to teach about proxy wars, manufactured outrage, and the dangers of really good branding. Because, let's be honest, if Modena had stolen, say, a doormat, no one would have written a poem, but a bucket? That's poetry fuel. That's war on a stick. Speaking of poetry, it hasn't stopped. There are still bards, both Modenese and Bolognese, traveling between cities, reciting war ballads in marketplaces. Most are terrible. Some are weirdly sexy. One is performed entirely by geese. You're also introduced to your new favorite local figure, Don Bartolo of Bologna, a monk, a part-time cheese critic, and the city's self-declared bucket apologist. He travels the countryside giving lectures on how the war was a spiritual awakening. His most popular sermon is titled, We Were All the Bucket. You attend one. He begins by yelling, the bucket is a mirror, then throws a ladle into the crowd and passes out from too much honey wine. You applaud, 5 stars, would convert. Here's your trivia Modena briefly attempted to mint. A commemorative coin shaped like a bucket. It didn't circulate well. Turns out round coins are round for a reason. But one of them still exists, housed in a drawer next to a dented helmet and a lock of donkey hair labeled Conchetta's steed. Meanwhile, new conspiracies are blooming. One popular theory now claims that the bucket was never Bolognese, that it had always been Modenese, and Bologna was just borrowing it for decades without asking. A counter theory insists the real bucket was switched with a replica after the battle, and that the genuine vessel was buried under a fig tree by a guilt-stricken monk. You spend a week helping dig behind the monastery. You find 5 rocks and 1 angry hedgehog. No bucket. Still, the energy is shifting. Trade resumes, farmers stop slashing each other's wagons, children start playing War of the Bucket in the streets again, but this time as a game, not a trauma response. You overhear one group arguing, I get to be Modena this time. No, I was Bologna last week. You be the bucket. I don't want to be the bucket. The bucket doesn't do anything. That child gets promoted to mayor, probably. Even the Modenese get in on the joke. One traveling troupe performs a satirical version of the war where everyone is a talking vegetable. The bucket is voiced by a man holding 2 wine bottles and a sense of cosmic regret. You laugh, you cry, you spill soup on your lap. And at the center of it all, in the archives, is you. The war's historian, the keeper of documents, the dusty chronicler of one of history's most petty disasters. You keep a special scroll hidden in your desk. It's not official, not public. It's titled Lessons from the Bucket. It begins, this was not a war about water. It was not a war about wood. It was a war about being seen, about who got to laugh last, and about how, in the end, nobody really did. You don't know if anyone will ever read it, but you write it anyway. Because history's job is not to mock or glorify, it's to remember, and to make absolutely sure no one ever fights a war over a communal hydration device ever again. Probably. It's been months since the last serious bucket-related incident. You know this because the city installed a Days Without Bucket Violence sign next to the public square. It currently reads 48. A child tries to change it to infinity. The mayor slaps his hand away. You've become something of a local curiosity now. People whisper when you walk by. That's the guy who carved the message into Modena's tower. They say, you don't correct them. You just squint meaningfully into the distance like a man haunted by oak. But deep down, you've changed. You're no longer just a soldier, or a watchman, or even a scribbler of sarcastic marginalia. No, you're a witness to absurdity, to glory, to a world where civic identity hinged on a glorified soup pail. And now, for reasons beyond your understanding, you've been invited to teach. Bologna's university, the oldest in Europe, and the only one that recently hosted a Buckets and Ethics Symposium, has asked you to give a public lecture titled The Real Battle of Zappolino, a Personal Recollection. You protest. I'm not a scholar. You're a survivor, says the dean, dramatically adjusting a feather in his hat. I threw up behind a bush and got kicked by a mule. Perfect, he says. Authenticity. So, you prepare. You don your finest robe, which is mostly unstained. You trim your beard. You rehearse your speech in front of a skeptical goose that may or may not be possessed by the spirit of Don Bartolo.
And then it's time.
The auditorium is packed. Students, nobles, merchants, a confused blacksmith who thought he was here for a pig auction. You step up to the podium. You take a breath. You begin. Ladies and gentlemen, I was there the day we lost a bucket and nearly our minds. Laughter. You tell them about Zappolino, the mud, the chaos, Conchetta's skillet. You act out the part where a soldier tried to duel a tree. You even share your theory about the pigeon conspiracy. The students are riveted. A noble weeps softly into his monocle. You close with this. We may never recover the bucket, but we did recover something else, our perspective. It was never about the wood. It was about what we poured into it: pride, anger, and occasionally soup. The room erupts in applause. You receive a standing ovation, 3 loaves of bread, and a voucher for free cider at the tavern. A student asks if you'll sign her bucket. You hesitate, then scrawl, "Stay hydrated, the bucket vet." Here's your historical fact. Bologna's university maintained a satirical tradition for centuries afterward, involving mock lectures about the war, especially around exam season. These included dramatic reenactments, musical numbers, and one notable puppet show where the bucket falls in love with a helmet. Here's your trivia treat. A street in Bologna is still nicknamed Via della Secchia Bucket Street, though no one agrees whether it's because of the war, a pub, or a very dramatic plumbing incident. The next day, something unexpected happens. You receive an invitation, sealed in green wax, marked with Modena's crest. You open it. You are cordially invited to attend La Giornata della Secchia, the Day of the Bucket, hosted in Modena's Civic Hall. You pause, you consider, and then you go. You travel alone, with a modest cloak and a lot of emotional baggage. When you arrive, you're escorted politely, even warmly, to the Civic Hall. You expect mockery. Instead, you're met with respect. They've hung paintings of the war, some serious, some ridiculous. There's a scroll listing the names of the fallen. There's a small corner where kids can paint their own bucket designs. One child makes one with wings and a halo. Another gives it fangs. Then you see it. The bucket, still resting in its protective case, still very wooden, still entirely ordinary. Except now, it has a small plaque beneath it. In memory of foolishness, bravery, and the strange things we fight for when we forget what matters. You stare at it for a long time. You're asked if you'd like to say something. You step forward. You clear your throat. And you say, "It's a nice bucket." Someone claps, then another. Soon the hall is filled with awkward but sincere applause. You're offered wine. You drink. You speak with old enemies. You laugh. You cry. Someone challenges you to a bucket balancing race. You lose to an 8-year-old with a lisp and no mercy. As the sun sets, you step outside. You look back at the hall. You feel peace. Historians will never agree on what the war meant. But you know what it did? It carved a ridiculous, unforgettable scar into the history of two cities. And that scar, strangely enough, healed them both. You returned to Bologna a changed man, not because you saw the bucket again, or because a Modenese bishop gave you a surprisingly warm hug after 3 glasses of red, but because, for the first time in your life, you feel like the joke isn't just on you anymore. It's on everyone. And weirdly, that's okay. The bucket war isn't a tragedy. It's not even a comedy. It's a civic fever dream that 2 entire cities decided to share instead of bury. And now that shared absurdity is something to build on. Not everyone agrees, of course. One councilman insists you were too cozy with the enemy. Another demands you debrief under oath about the bucket's condition. He holds up a detailed diagram and says, "Were there scratches?" You respond by pulling a half-eaten fig out of your cloak and saying, "This is how I process trauma." He backs away. Meanwhile, you're suddenly in high demand. Local schools ask you to speak. Artists ask to paint you. One woman insists she's writing an epic love poem from the perspective of the bucket and asks you to serve as a vibe consultant. You agree. In a weird way, the bucket has become Bologna's mascot, not a symbol of loss, but one of ridiculous endurance. You even see a baker selling secchia scones. You buy one. It's awful, but you eat it out of patriotic guilt. Then, one afternoon, something happens that shakes you. You're walking past the city archives when you see a group of children playing near the well. Not fighting, not shouting insults, just playing. One of them is holding a little wooden bucket on a string. He turns to another and says, "You be Modena today. I'll be Bologna, but we have to share the bucket." You stop in your tracks. You say nothing. You just watch. Because that sentence would have caused an actual riot 20 years ago. And now it's just part of a game. Not history, not shame, just a toy, a memory. Here's your historical fact. By the 16th century, the War of the Bucket had largely faded from official records, but lived on in folklore, satire, and children's games throughout the Emilia-Romagna region. It became legend not because of its violence, but because of its weirdness. Here's your trivia nugget. Some local families started passing down wooden buckets as heirlooms, not the bucket, obviously. Just buckets with engraved messages like "Remember to laugh" or "Don't invade Modena." One was auctioned off in the 1800s with the description, "Very round, may contain ancestral trauma." You start writing your own version of events. Not the official scrolls, not the mayor-approved ones. Yours. A personal history, honest, messy, occasionally poetic. You don't write it for glory. You write it because someone needs to remember that the world once went to war over splinters and pride. And because someday, someone will look back and say, they really did what over a bucket. And when they do, your scroll will be there to say, yes, and it was exactly as stupid as it sounds. You include everything, the sneaking, the carving, the cat with the hat, even the Modenese wine that made you rethink theology. You don't leave out the fear or the absurdity or the moment when a child ended the war in a single sentence, "We have to share." You end the scroll like this. If history repeats itself, may it at least do so with better wine and fewer helmets shaped like chickens. You seal it with wax. You leave it in the archives, not hidden, just waiting. Because someday someone else will need to read it. Not to understand war, but to understand people. Your final official act as bucket veteran number 071 is surprisingly simple. You organize a public performance of La Secchia Rapita, the epic parody poem, a full cast, lute players, a woman playing the bucket with the emotional range of Hamlet. It's a hit. The audience laughs, cries. Someone in the third row throws a baguette out of pure joy. And as the play ends with the bucket floating into the stars, as the chorus sings a dramatic Latin hymn that loosely translates to, "It's just a container. Calm down, you feel done. Not tired, not broken, just at peace." You walk home under the stars. And for the first time in your life, you look at a well and don't check to see if it's guarded. You're older now. You creak when you stand up. You grunt when you sit down. You can predict the weather based on which scar starts throbbing. And your knees argue with gravity every time stairs are involved. But the city's still here.
So are you?
And yes, the bucket's still in Modena. You've stopped being bitter. You've even stopped being amused. Now you're just grateful that you lived through it, that you came out with stories, that when people say you fought in the dumbest war ever, you get to answer, I didn't fight in it. I survived it. Bologna is quieter now, more peaceful. Not perfect, no city ever is, but the edge has softened. New generations have arrived, and they don't carry the same fury in their bones. They laugh about the war. They wear it like a quirky badge, not a scar. A local tavern rebrands as the Dripping Bucket. Their signature drink, a murky wine blend served in wooden cups that leaks slightly for authenticity. You get free drinks there, lifetime membership. You're listed on the menu as local bucket philosopher. You still visit the archive sometimes. You've become a bit of a relic yourself. People ask you strange questions now, like, did the bucket glow? Was it cursed? Is it true you proposed to a Modenese noblewoman during a ceasefire? You never answer. You just raise an eyebrow and say, a bucket never tells. Here's your final historical fact. The War of the Bucket remains one of the most famously absurd wars in medieval European history. It's been referenced in songs, literature, plays, and academic lectures as a case study in symbolic warfare, civic pride, and how humans will fight over anything if you give them enough time and alcohol. And here's your last trivia treat. The actual bucket still exists. To this day, it is kept in Modena, in a glass case. Inside the Torre della Ghirlandina, tour guides proudly point to it. Children press their noses against the glass. Some people even cry. Not because it's beautiful, because it lasted. You go to visit it one final time. You're older, slower, your knees click like castanets when you walk. Modena hasn't changed much. They've added a cafe. That's about it. You enter the tower. No guards stop you. You've written enough letters, given enough speeches, worn enough robes. The staff just nods. You stand before the bucket. It's smaller than you remember, but it's still there. Old wood, iron hoops, tiny cracks in the grain, but somehow it's held together, just like the cities, just like you. You lean in. You whisper, you little bastard, you actually made it. You smile. You walk out into the sun. Children run past you, laughing. One's holding a bucket on a stick, waving it like a sword. Another yells, Modena rules, and a third screams back, Bologna forever. You shake your head. Some things never change. But now, at least, they're harmless. And maybe, just maybe, healing. Take a breath. You're here now, safe, far from muddy hills and cursed wells and ridiculous declarations of symbolic warfare, far from the smell of fermented goat and pre-battle panic, far from the clang of helmets that didn't fit and armies that didn't know why they were angry anymore. It's over. The march, the mud, the monumentally stupid speeches, the bucket. Yes, the bucket is still in its case, but the war, it's done. You didn't lose, you didn't win, you witnessed. And sometimes that's more important than anything. Now, let your breath slow, let your jaw unclench, let your eyes get heavier with each blink. If there's a moral to all this, and there might not be, it's that people will always find something to fight over, but sometimes they also find a way to laugh, to forgive, to let go. And maybe that's what the bucket was all along, a strange little mirror, reflecting not just pride and power, but the deeper, softer truth beneath it. That we're all ridiculous, that we're all fragile, and that sometimes the best thing we can do is put down the sword, pick up a cup, and pour a drink for someone we once called enemy. Rest now. There are no battles left. No one's coming for your water. No one's stealing your sleep. The bucket's fine. And so are you.